We had a really amazing day today on the front lines near Zaporizhia. We went down to a place called Orihiv, which I've been to before 3 years ago. At that time, 3 years ago, it was about 2 miles from the front lines, and today it's about 2 miles from the front lines. So where we were today, we could hear heavy fighting off in the distance, but there are civilians there who have not evacuated and they need to evacuate. But we learned today a lot about why it is so hard for these people to leave their homes and evacuate. And so I wanted to show you some of what we saw today. We are going out with a team of chaplains, Ukrainian chaplains, who does this on a regular basis and has been since the beginning of the war. This is extremely dangerous, what they're doing. And you'll see why. We actually, just like when we went to Kherson the other day, we had to drive under about 10 miles of those nets that are over the road to protect from the drones. And we actually even saw an enemy drone that had crashed into the net and was trapped in the net today. So the threat is very real. We saw people whose homes had been bombed in the last 2 days, and everywhere from Zaporizhia south is sort of under that threat. The Russians are, again, they're not bombing military bases. They're bombing people's houses. They're bombing apartment buildings and stores, and they could bomb this hotel I'm sitting in right now. So we had several people on the list today that they wanted to try to get to. We weren't sure we could do it. The drone threat is just sky high down there. However, we had been praying for bad weather because it's harder for the drones to see you and to fly. And we got our wish. We got our prayer answered. We had rain, slop, mist, fog. So we're trying to drive into these villages that have dirt roads that are now just slop, just mud. There were several times where one of our vehicles got stuck and had to work on it to get it out. But we finally made it into the first home of a family that we were trying to get out. And I just want to pull up the video while I'm talking here and let you see. This little lady is 87 years old. She was born in this house and she had moved away and then come back. She was having to leave her home and probably never see it again. She was very frail, couldn't move. You can see there that she couldn't really move very fast. And eventually we just had to pick her up and carry her. This poor woman has never traveled outside of the county, I guess you'd call it, the district where she lives in her life. She doesn't have any money. She's just subsistence farm out there. They grow what they need and they barter for things. So along with the rest of her family, including a 14-year-old, her great grandson, we got them to the van, put them in the van, and drove them back to a safer area. Still not completely safe, but safe enough that not out of the threat completely of drones. We went back in. We went into another little village that, again, you could hear the fighting from there. There was a family, it was a husband and wife. They had 2 kids. The husband was having the wife and the 2 kids leave and go to safety to a shelter that's being provided by the government. The husband had a broken leg and was on crutches, but he said he was going to stay at that house for another week or 2 until he got healed up enough, and then he would go join his family at the shelter. This shelter was put together by the government. We met with the governor of Zaporizhia Oblast this morning at the shelter, and they were sort of inaugurating a new shelter because the old one's already completely full. We took these 2 kids, which are middle schoolers, and the mom. You can see they're taking their stuff out of there in garbage bags, and it's raining, it's wet, nasty. We were escorted by some Ukrainian policemen who were out there with 12-gauge shotguns and birdshot, and they would go surround the house looking up like this and just, ready to shoot down any drones that came by. And so with them pulling security, we all went in and helped them get their clothes and their stuff together, and then sort of get them loaded into the van again, very muddy, very nasty, and then drive them out of there back to the place where the first people were waiting. And then we went for the third lady, and the third house was gut wrenching. Woman is in her early 80s. She's been sick and she didn't have anybody caring for her. So there was a 17-year-old girl. She's an orphan. Her parents were both killed. She didn't have anywhere else to live. So she went to live with this old lady. And the lady was so sick, she quit eating about a month ago. So this woman hasn't eaten in a month. So she can't get up. She can't care for herself. She was laying in her own filth and was in a really bad way. So we went in and got her. They made a stretcher out of some blankets and they hauled her out of that house and took her over to our armored van that we had and laid her in the back seat and strapped her in the back seat in there with everybody else. And then from there, we took everybody to the shelter in Zephyr. We left that house. When we got the old woman out of there, that 17-year-old girl was just standing there. You could tell she was just unsure what she should do. She didn't have a place to go. She needed to be evacuated, but she has no money. She has nowhere to go. She doesn't know. Again, these people have never traveled. She was just really scared. So the female police officer stood there and talked to her for about 10 minutes and just convinced her, you really need to go. And she just kept saying, like, I don't have any money. I don't have anything. So thanks to those of you who donated yesterday on yesterday's podcast, there were several people who gave money yesterday and said, use this to help somebody. I said, this is the perfect opportunity. So we were able to give her some money. Here's the video of that. So this is Nastya. She's 17 years old. She's an orphan and she's been living in this house for the last
half a year.
Nastya has been living in this house, taking care of an elderly lady who lived here for the last 6 months. She's only 17 years old and she's an orphan. She has nowhere else to go. So I want you to know that those of you who gave money yesterday and asked me to help somebody that was in need, she's going to have to figure out what to do next. And so we just gave that money to her. And so I want to pray for you right now. Jesus, I just pray that you would be with Nastya, that you would guide her and direct her and protect her and provide for her. Send your angels to camp around her, Lord. And we pray that you just give her peace and courage and strength. In Jesus' name, amen. You're going to be okay. So she was very scared, but she at least has some funds now, which is a month worth of food or shelter. Now she can get a free shelter in the new shelter that they just opened up in Zaporizhia. And the police woman said, I will check in on you and I'll make sure that you're okay. That was all of the rescues we had time for today. And when we got everybody back to the new shelter, they decided that the 83-year-old lady who hadn't eaten in a month, she didn't need to go to the shelter. She needed to go to the hospital. So they actually had an ambulance waiting for her there. And we loaded her onto the ambulance. And then they took her directly from there to the hospital to try to get some nourishment into her and maybe save her life. I was checking her pulse and it was strong. So I think she may survive. Think about how hard it is for people like this because they're getting pulled out of the home that they were born in, they lived in for their whole lives, taken away from their animals and everything that they care about, all their mementos, all their pictures, everything that's valuable to them. And they're just escaping with the clothes on their backs. And these people have never stayed in a hotel. They've never been on an airplane or maybe even a train in some cases. These people are heating their homes with wood. They didn't have any electricity. The people who are still in those villages out there are in a bad way. There's no two ways about it. They're living a third world existence out there at this point. There were several other people that were in the villages that we stopped at that we talked to and tried to talk them into leaving. And I just wanted to share one story because I thought this will resound with many of our viewers. One lady said, I can't leave because I'm the only one that's taking care of the animals around here. And I've got 50 cats in my basement from the whole village. All the village's cats are in my basement and I'm taking care of the stray dogs. And they're not stray dogs, they're family dogs, but the people have left and the dogs are now basically strays. And she said, I have to stay. That's my mission, is to take care of these animals. So I know there have been a lot of people who had asked about the pets. And one of the things that this chaplain group was talking about at lunch was that they wish they could save all the animals, but they just don't have the funding. They don't have enough funding to take care of the people, much less the animals. So they're prioritizing as best they can. When they go into those places, they'll take supplies in and offload them for people who are there. And then they will take the people that are evacuating and get them out. But in this case, they didn't do that because we don't want the people to stay in there. They're way too close to the front lines. The first family with the 87-year-old woman, oh my goodness, she was so grateful. And she speaks Russian. She doesn't speak Ukrainian. And I asked one lady at the shelter who's 72, I said, "You grew up here in Donbass?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you consider yourself Russian or Ukrainian?" And she said, "I'm Ukrainian. I speak Russian, but that doesn't make me Russian. My ancestors came from Russia because of the Holodomor, when everybody was starved to death in 1932 and 33. They moved in a bunch of Russians into Ukraine to work the farms that were empty because everybody died because of the Russian or the Soviet crackdown on the kulaks and all that." So she said, the fact that we speak Russian doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we are 100% Ukrainian here. And she even went so far as to say what I've heard other people say: we were ambivalent toward the Russians at the beginning before the war. We could take them or leave them. We'd travel over there, visit our family and whatever. But now we loathe the Russians. We have seen what they are like. And this is the thing that just keeps getting struck home to me over and over. The Russian society, and maybe this goes back to the Soviet Union and denying God, because we talk about when people deny God, that he will give you over to a depraved mind to think that good is evil and evil is good, and to do what ought not be done. And I asked several people who grew up in the Soviet Union today, why is that? Why are the Russians just brutal? They don't care that they're hunting civilians. It doesn't bother them at all to murder Christians in the occupied areas. We talked to one of the chaplains that was with us today out there doing rescues. He was taken captive by the Russians at the beginning of the war because he was in an area that got taken over by Russia. They rounded him up because he was connected to the military as a chaplain and he was working for the church. That was like two strikes against him. They threw him in a pit with other prisoners, didn't feed them for a week. And they would come along and they would torture him, take him out, beat him, tie him to the wall, beat him black and blue, and then throw him several times. He said they came up to this pit that had all these guys in it and just opened fire and killed two or three of them, and then left the bodies in the pit. And of course, they're living in their own filth. They have no sanitation. He was very close to dying when another chaplain who is more well known, that was more at risk of being killed by Russia if he got caught. He just said, "This guy is my protege and I couldn't abandon him. I had to go get him." And so I just prayed. And they had told the first chaplain, "You're never getting out of here. You're going to die here. Nobody gets out of this place." But this other chaplain, they're both named Igor too. We called one Igor and the other one Igorito. So Igorito, the younger one, said, "I was just praying that God would make it quick. I'm coming to see you, Jesus." And the older Igor said, "I just prayed and said, I've got to try to go get him." And he showed up at the prison and he said, "I want that guy out." And they said, "Okay." And they went and got him and let him go. He said it was absolutely a miracle. Ukraine is struggling to keep the front lines full of men and be able to rotate them out in time, but they're not even drafting any young men below the age of 25 here in Ukraine. The draft is only 25 and over at this point. Now, they may have to go lower and draft people that are 22, 21, something like that. But that's why you see military age males, adult males, young men walking around, going to the gym, going out to working at the restaurants or whatever, because Ukraine actually has a lot of men in reserve and they can hold out for a long time. Now, one other thing that came out today I wanted to mention is that the United States share of who is funding this war, who is helping Ukraine, has dropped to almost nothing. What we are now doing is selling military hardware to NATO, and NATO countries are donating that to Ukraine. So it's not costing America anything. As a matter of fact, it's creating American jobs because the Europeans are buying all of this equipment from the United States and then giving it to Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is also working very hard to become more independent and to make their own weapons and missiles and ammunition and stuff like that. Nate and I went to 5 or 6 different Army surplus stores, and almost everything in those stores is actually made here in Ukraine. There are military gear manufacturers popping up everywhere, and it's good stuff. It's stuff that I would definitely carry. They are becoming more independent. They are gaining momentum. I won't say that the threat is past. There's no way. There's always a million things that could happen tomorrow that we can't plan for. But what I will say is this trip has given me hope. It's made me really sick to my stomach because I've realized that Russia is a death cult with a lot of oil. So it's very similar to what ISIS would have been if they had been able to take over all of Syria and have all their oil wealth from Syria. They are a death cult. That's all there is to it.